textbooks. I'm Jeff, and today we're talking about Thomas Hobbes, the Leviathan, one of the fundamental bedrocks of Western political philosophy, and also one of the greatest magic tricks ever performed, convincing people that the government punches them in the face, they are somehow punching themselves. That is not a metaphor I pulled from a gas station bathroom. That is basically logic behind a lot of modern state theory. The article on Mises.org we're working from compares Hobbes' state to that old childhood bullying routine where the bigger kid grabs a smaller kid's arm and forces himself to hit himself and saying, "Why are you hitting yourself?" The point is simple. Just because your own hand made contact with your own face does not mean you consented to the beating. You were coerced. You were overpowered. You were not the author of the action. You were the victim of it. And yet, when it comes to the state, a lot of very educated adults suddenly forget this distinction. They say, well, government represents the people. The state is us. Sounds very authoritarian. We voted for this. We consented through the social contract. What fucking contract? Oh, really? Because I don't remember signing a contract where I agreed that a distant bureaucracy could take a big chunk of my income, regulate my property, spy on my transactions, police my speech, and then tell me it's all legitimate because somewhere, somehow, allegedly, we agreed. And that's Hobbes' great trick. And to understand the modern state, you have to understand Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes wrote the Leviathan in 1651. This is one of the foundational works of modern political philosophy. Hobbes was writing in the shadow of civil war, religious violence, political instability, and general human chaos of the 17th century. So when Hobbes looked at mankind, he did not exactly see a neighborhood barbecue. He saw danger. He saw insecurity. He saw conflict. He saw people as naturally driven by fear, pride, revenge, competition, and, above all, self-preservation. In Hobbes' famous view, without a common power to keep people in awe, life in the state of nature becomes a war of every man against every man. In other words, without government, Hobbes believed humanity turned into a Black Friday sale at Walmart, except everyone had swords and unresolved childhood trauma. Now, Hobbes' solution was not limited government. It was not constitutional restraint. It was not, let's set up a referee with clearly defined powers. No, Hobbes' answer was the Leviathan, and this permeates every part of society. The Leviathan, a sovereign power, a state with a monopoly on coercion, a common authority strong enough to terrify people into behaving. And that right there is the key. Hobbes did not say people are flawed, so let's be careful about giving anyone too much power. He said people are flawed. So let's create one giant artificial monster with enough power to dominate everyone else. That's like saying, my neighbor might steal my lawnmower, so I should release a bear into the subdivision. Sure, maybe the neighbors behave now, but congratulations, genius. You still have a bear on the loose. Good luck getting that one caught up. And Hobbes' bear is called the state. Now here is where the social contract comes in. Hobbes argued that because humans fear chaos, violence, and insecurity, they agreed to surrender their individual authority to a sovereign. This sovereign then acts on behalf of the people. The people authorize it. The state represents them. That's why in cases they'll say, the people of Illinois versus whoever. The state becomes the public person. The state becomes us. And this is where the whole thing gets slippery. But once the state is treated as the representative of the people, then the action of the state are treated as actions of the people themselves. So when the state taxes you, guess what? You taxed yourself. When the state regulates you, you regulated yourself. When the state drafts you, you drafted yourself. When the state throws you in a cage for violating some rule written by people you never met, enforced by agencies you can't meaningfully control, interpreted by courts you did not appoint, and funded by money they took from you first. Hobbesian logic says, well, technically, you authorized this. Why are you hitting yourself? And that is the entire punchline of this. Except it's not funny when it's a policy put in place by government. This is the core critique of the article. Hobbes' theory treats state action as consensual because the state supposedly derives authority from the people, from the consent of the governed. But if the consent is fictional, implied, inherited, or impossible to revoke, then what kind of consent is that? Now let's step out of the state and imagine applying this logic anywhere else. A company says, by living within 500 miles of our headquarters, you consent to buying our product. A mother says, by walking down this alley, you consent to my services of beating you around the head and taking your valuables. An ex says, by not moving to another country, you agreed to remain in this relationship. Now, what would we all call this? I would call it insane. I don't know what you would call it. But when government does it, suddenly political theorists put on tweed jackets and call it legitimacy. This is why libertarians are skeptical of the social contract theory. Not because we hate order, not because we want Mad Max with cryptocurrencies, not because we believe every road should be defended by shirtless dudes named Chad with homemade toll booths. We are skeptical because consent actually means something. As feminists love to say, yes means yes and no means no. Consent is not real if you cannot say no. Consent is not real if you were born into it. Consent is not real if leaving requires abandoning your home, family, job, property, language, and of course your culture. Consent is not real if the contract binds you, but not the people ruling you. And that last point is so huge in this entire thing. In Hobbes' system, the people covenant with each other to create the sovereign, but the sovereign itself is not bound by a contract with the people in the same way. That means the subject can violate the agreement and be punished, but the sovereign can't really violate it in any way that frees the people from obedience to it. That is not a contract. That is a trap with some Latin footnotes in it. A real contract has 3 parts. Mutual obligation. You do this, I do that. If one party violates the terms, then there are consequences. But Hobbes gives us a one-way contract. The people owe obedience. The sovereign gives authority. The subject can be punished. The state can't be meaningfully held accountable by the subjects because, according to Hobbes, the sovereign acts in their name. So, if the sovereign does something harmful, Hobbes says the subject can't really accuse the sovereign of injustice because the subject is considered the author of the sovereign's actions. Again, why are you hitting yourself? And this is where Hobbes becomes especially dangerous for people who love liberty. He does not merely say the state is powerful. He says the state's power is authorized by you. He does not merely say the sovereign can coerce. He says your complaint against coercion is logically confused because the sovereign represents you. So the state can harm you, punish you, seize you, command you, and still claim legitimacy because it supposedly acts as your representative. Wow, isn't that interesting? That's a magnificent racket to have. I wish I could have it. It is political jujitsu. The state grabs your own concept of consent, twists it behind your back, and uses it to justify your obedience. And this is not just some dusty 17th century theory locked in a museum next to powdered wigs and plague masks. This is still logic that is around today. You hear it every time someone says, "We are the government." No, we are not the government. I do not remember voting on the Federal Register. I do not remember approving every military intervention. I do not remember personally signing off on every tax hike, spending bill, surveillance program, inflationary policy, corporate bailout, asset forfeiture abuse, zoning restrictions, or bureaucratic power grabs. And here's the zinger, and neither did you. Now, some will say, but Jeff, we have elections. Why, yes, we do have elections. And elections matter insofar, but elections are not the same thing as individual consent. We get back to this thing of consent. Voting does not magically transform coercion into consent. If 51% of your neighbors vote to take your car, that's not consent. That is democracy with a tow truck. If a politician wins office with a fraction of eligible voters, then signs laws that bind hundreds of millions of people, including people who voted against him, did not vote, were not old enough to vote, or were not even alive when the system was created, calling that consent is doing more heavy lifting than government employees pretending to work from home. And before someone screams, so you want no government at all? Let's calm it down a little bit. Put the pitchforks back in the garage and just think for a minute. The article is specifically dealing with Hobbes' justification for a sovereign state with overwhelming authority. The issue is not whether society needs rules. Of course society needs rules. The issue is whether the state can claim absolute legitimacy by pretending its actions are automatically your actions. Libertarians such as myself are not saying humans are angels. In fact, libertarians often agree with Hobbes on one important point. Humans are flawed. Where libertarians differ is what we do with that fact. Hobbes says humans are dangerous, therefore we need a sovereign with massive power. Libertarians say humans are dangerous, therefore maybe not give a small group of them a monopoly on legal violence. I mean, that seems like a pretty important distinction for anyone with a functioning brain. If people are selfish, corruptible, power hungry, tribal, emotional, and prone to abusing others, why would the solution be to concentrate power in the hands of politicians, bureaucrats, police agencies, militaries, regulators, and of course courts? That is not solving human nature in the least. That is weaponizing it. And we don't want to weaponize this. The state is not run by mythical creatures from Mount Virtue. It is run by people, the same flawed people Hobbes was worried about. So, when someone says, without the state, people would exploit each other, the libertarian answer is, have you watched the state? Have you seen what happens when coercion gets a badge, a budget, and qualified immunity? Have you seen what happens when politicians spend money they don't earn, make rules they do not follow, and create crises they use to demand more power? Never let a good crisis go to waste. Hobbes feared the war of all against all. Fine. That is a real concern, but the state can become the war of some against all, funded by all, justified in the name of all, and protected from accountability by calling itself all. And that is the danger. The Hobbesian state says, trust us, we are you. But if the state is really us, why does it need so much force to make us comply? Why does our government need threats, fines, raids, prisons, audits, licenses, permits, surveillance, and armed enforcement? I do not need a SWAT team to make me eat the sandwich that I voluntarily ordered from Jimmy John's. Consent does not usually require handcuffs unless you're into that type of thing. Now, the defenders of Hobbes might say, look, the alternative is chaos. Without a common power, society collapses. But there is a difference between order and obedience. Those are two very different things. There's a difference between a law and a command. There's a difference between justice and whatever the sovereign says today because someone got enough votes or inherited enough institutional power. Us libertarians, we are not against order. We are against pretending that order requires unlimited centralized coercion. Now, what creates order? Markets create order. Families create order. Let's see, there's a couple more. The community that you live in creates order. And customs create order within a society. Voluntary associations create order. Private agreements create order. Common law traditions created order long before the modern administrative state started regulating everything from your paycheck to your shower head. The question is not state or chaos. That is a false choice Hobbes sells us. The real question is how much coercion is justified under what conditions, with what limits, and what happens when coercive institutions become the aggressor. Because Hobbes gives the sovereign an escape hatch. The sovereign really can't commit injustice against the subject in the normal sense because the subject has supposedly authorized the sovereign's actions. Now that's terrifying to me. That means accountability runs upward, not downward. The people answer to the state. The state does not truly answer to the people. And once you accept that framework, you've already lost the argument for liberty. You are not debating whether the state violated your rights. You are debating whether you were too stupid to understand that the state violating your rights was actually you exercising authority through the state against yourself. Now, why are you hitting yourself still? This is why language matters. When politicians say, we, ask them who they mean. When they say, we decided, ask who got to decide. And when they say, we need sacrifice, ask who is doing the sacrificing and who is cashing the check. When they say the people demand action, ask whether it's actual individual people demanding it or whether it's political actors using the people as a human shield for power. Because the people is one of the most abused phrases in politics, right next to I did not have sexual relations with that woman. The people want this. The people voted for this. The people have spoken. How often have we heard these words in modern political discourse? Here's one for the left. The people must pay. The people must obey. That's on the right. Funny how the people always seem to have the exact same opinion as whoever controls the microphone. That's interesting, isn't it? I can lead the world with a microphone. Hobbes' Leviathan is built on the idea that individuals become one artificial body under the sovereign. The people are absorbed into the state. The sovereign becomes the head. The citizens become the body. Now that image is incredibly powerful, but it also reveals the problem we have. In real life, you are not a cell in a political organism. You are an individual human being with your own mind, your own conscience, your own labor, your own property, your own rights, and your own moral agency. The state does not own your person because some dead philosopher imagined a contract before you were even born or before you even thought of. And this is where the libertarian critique hits the hardest. If consent is real, it must be individual. If rights are real, they must limit the state. If government is legitimate, it must be held accountable, and real accountability. If power is dangerous, it must be divided, restrained, questioned, and constantly watched like a toddler holding a lighter near curtains. Because the state always says it needs power for your protection that was used after 9/11. It needs taxes for your security. It needs surveillance for your safety, another post 9/11 idea. It needs emergency authority for your survival, another post 9/11. It needs censorship for your protection. It needs control for the common good. And sometimes, yes, there are real problems. Crime is real. Violence is real. Foreign threats are real. Disorder is real. But every tyrant in history had a reason. Every expansion of power comes wearing the costume of necessity. Hobbes gave the modern state one of its most useful costumes. The claim that you consented to this. That the state is you. That when it acts, you act. Even if it's not to your benefit. That when it coerces you, it is somehow your own will being carried out. This kind of morbid and very freaky. That is not liberty. That is philosophical Stockholm Syndrome. Now, to be fair, Hobbes was not an idiot and I bagged on him some here. He was dealing with real problems. How do human beings escape violent insecurity? That is a serious question. A libertarian can't be just vibes and freedom flags. We have to answer the problem of order. But Hobbes' solution creates another problem. Who protects us from the protector? If I hire a security guard to protect my store and he starts robbing the cash register, I do not say, well, since I hired him, I guess I'm robbing myself. No, I fire him. I prosecute him. I stop pretending his badge transforms theft into customer service. The same logic should apply to the state. If government exists to protect rights, then when it violates rights, it has contradicted its own purpose. If government exists by consent, then consent cannot be assumed forever, inherited automatically, or defined so broadly that refusal becomes impossible. If government serves the people, then the people are not morally obligated to worship it, excuse it, or identify with it. Patriotism is not obedience to the state, although the right would like you to believe that. Civic responsibility is not pretending coercion is consent, and loving your country does not require licking the boot that is standing on your neck. And that is the final lesson here. Hobbes looked at chaos and built a monster to stop it. Libertarians look at the monster and ask it, what happens when that becomes chaos? What happens when you, the state, become the chaos? Because once the state gets big enough, powerful enough, unaccountable enough, and sacred enough, it does not just protect society, it consumes society. It speaks in your name. It spends in your name. It kills in your name. It censors ideas in your name. It imprisons in your name. It borrows in your name to the tune of $39 trillion. It inflates the money supply in your name. It regulates in your name. And then, when you complain, it looks at you with a straight face and says that magical phrase, why are you hitting yourself? That is Hobbes' state, and that is the danger of fake consent. And that is why libertarians keep asking the question polite society absolutely hates and dogs on us for, and we'll take those arrows. Did you actually agree to this, or were you just born into a system that calls your obedience consent? Because there is a difference, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now that's it for today's episode of Are You Smarter Than a Libertarian? I'm Jeff, reminding you that the next time the state says we are all in this together, check your wallet, check your rights, and check whether we means you pay while they rule. And remember, if someone grabs your hand, forces you to hit yourself, and then blames you for the bruises, that is not a social contract. That is just bullying with better branding and PR. Until next time, I'm Jeff. Stay free, stay informed, and stay accountable. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on all podcasting platforms.